Welcome to Matrescence Unfiltered, the podcast exploring what really happens to your identity, ambition, and career when you become a mother. Matrescence is the transition into motherhood, and it's one of the biggest identity shifts a woman will ever go through. Yet, when it comes to our careers, it's still barely understood. So often, motherhood gets framed as something to push through and bounce back from.
We think it's something else entirely, a capability shift, and we think it's time to name it and to talk about it properly. I'm Rose, coach, consultant, and researcher completing a master's in organisational psychology.
And I'm Bianca, a Chief Marketing Officer, pregnant, and living this experience in real time. Each episode, we take one belief about motherhood and work that doesn't hold up under scrutiny and break it down properly.
Using research, lived experience, and honest conversations about what sustainable high performance actually looks like when your identity is shifting.
Welcome to Matrescence Unfiltered. We're really glad you're here.
Just before we get into today's episode, just to share a quick sensitivity note. This episode discusses miscarriage and pregnancy loss, including the medical process and emotional aftermath. If you're pregnant, trying to conceive, or in early postpartum, please listen with care. There's a gender pay gap, a gender pension gap, a gender investment gap. Our guest today thinks a gender AI skills gap is coming next, and she is on a mission to close it. Lauren Ingram runs AI Girl Gang, a community helping women get to grips with AI before they get left behind. She has spent years at the front of emerging tech, and a lot of that started on maternity leave, building from her phone with a newborn under one arm. In today's episode, we get into something rare and honest, the way two of the biggest moments in her career were bookmarked by pregnancy, why she wants to swap the fear of being left behind for curiosity and a bit of play, and the first small steps any woman can take, even from the sofa on maternity leave. She also retires a term that put all the blame on her. Lauren, welcome to Matrescence Unfiltered.
Thank you. I really appreciate you guys inviting me to be part of this because I didn't know the word matrescence when I became a mum nearly 5 years ago, and now it's actually out in the world, something that mums are starting to kind of get to grips with, and excited to be here. In terms of what I'm working on, I'm spending pretty much all of my time now running my community AI Girl Gang, looking to upskill as many women as possible. I boldly said that we'd upskill 1 million women, which I haven't fully worked out how to execute that. But it feels really exciting. It's what I'm passionate about, is helping women get to grips with the kind of the latest technology that affects all of us. So in practice, there's been kind of in-person events. I've got a Substack. We've had a couple of different names, and AI Girl Gang is the kind of latest iteration of what we do, and now also includes a Substack. And that's already growing. It's like 1,500 subscribers on there in the last month. So yeah, it feels exciting. It feels like there's a kind of real like moment around women and AI, and then also kind of working out where does that fit in with real life and mum life, and fitting it all together. And I also moved to the countryside last year, which doesn't have to be relevant, but it feels like, for me, it feels like a really big part of my life now is like we have kind of slowed down by moving out of London. So I'm in a kind of high tech, fast moving industry in a sleepy, slow village.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, there's like a nice balance there between like busy tech life and, as you said, that sleepy countryside. So becoming a mother is a development of identity, but it shouldn't be a disruption to it. So your brain rewires, your ambition doesn't switch off, but the workplace keeps reading this change as a downgrade. And actually, it is a neurological upgrade when you go through matrescence. You've spent your career getting women into rooms where the future gets built. What happens to that ambition, do you think, when a woman becomes a mother?
I think it's very personal as to how that plays out, because I think most women, when they become a mum, feel differently about work. But I think for some people, they do get slightly less ambitious in the sense that they really want to kind of gear their week around spending as much time as possible with their kid or kids, and or working out how work can be more flexible. I mean, that's also true of me, that I feel like I've tried to make work as flexible as possible, that I can be there for every drop off and pick up for school. And yet my ambition hasn't waned. I've just had to find a way to make both of those things work at the same time. That doesn't always work, but in terms of my ambition, something did shift in me. I'm trying to think how I describe the feeling of becoming a mum, because it's not something I've really been asked before. I found the beginning really hard. like newborn life, and work wasn't really on my mind right at that very beginning part. Um, but I don't know, like the few days after giving birth, or a C-section in the end, that hormone drop, and I was just like in floods of tears, saying to my partner, I can't imagine how single mums do this. This is so hard, even though we've got our village. I've got you. I've got my mum helping. Da, da. And he's like, but you're not a single mum. And I was like, but what if I was? It just just in literally like floods of tears on the kitchen floor, and um, and then yeah, I guess it it evolves. I think initially I maybe thought that that not quite that life would fit, the baby would fit around my life, not quite as extreme as that, but I think there has been a sort of shift since of like, I think my parent identity almost kind of comes above my working identity now in my head, as well as how I'm perceived elsewhere. I'm not sure. So yeah, for me, my ambition definitely changed. And I think it's also given me more motivation to do the things that I do because, um, yeah, because I care so much about sort of supporting women in learning about what's coming next, what it means for them, and helping them feel less of the overwhelm. And I do think this stuff does intersect with things like being a mum. If you've taken maternity leave or going on maternity leave, between when ChatGPT came out in 2022 and now, it can feel really daunting, right? That feels like everything's going to change while you're not there. Somebody gave me some really helpful advice on this because she's being asked about it. So Natalie Benoit, she leads UK marketing for Google Gemini, and she's taken maternity leave twice in the last sort of 3-4 years, I think it is. And she said, you don't actually need to know everything that happened while you were out of the workplace. You just need to know what the sort of latest version is, like the previous AI models, or like what the previous workflows and things that people had been learning about and implementing. They might well have become obsolete in the time that you were also out. And so you just need to know what's the latest version. How do people do things right now and not worry about what happened in the interim?
Lauren, I love that as somebody who is only 1 month into her maternity leave and is religiously subscribed to AI Girl Gang to make sure that I'm staying up to date, but doing so in a way that actually feels true to me, my interests, and that feels a bit more of a part of a community. Because I've also been reading a lot of the empire of AI and just getting into that side of things. And it can feel, as you know better than I do, incredibly male dominated and determined. Thinking about being on maternity leave there, I'd love to know a bit more about your maternity leave. Did you feel pressure at that time to learn everything, build a new project, start a new business? Because there is a bit of that in my mind. What did that look like for you? And what advice would you give other women going on maternity leave about how best to approach time off that actually isn't time off at all?
I think I probably had a slightly unusual setup, or at least it felt unusual to me at the time. So when I was unemployed and therefore rebranded myself as self-employed, I had spent a couple of years working at Meta as a contractor, and I tried to go permanent. This was also mid-pandemic. Well, headcount was kind of all over the place. So didn't manage to go permanent. And that's also when I found out that I was pregnant with our now nearly 5-year-old. And so I honestly thought this was like the end of the world. I couldn't understand what you do if you're like having a baby and don't have a job. I thought you have to have one to have the other. And it's sort of hard to get out of that mindset of like, I need to have a job, therefore I need to have sort of paid maternity leave. I didn't really know what would happen at the point of having a baby. I just, like the world would just kind of randomly implode if I didn't have a job. But I was trying to get a job while I was pregnant, didn't manage to. And that's why I decided to sort of upskill in all things like emerging tech. So at that point, it was things like the metaverse, Web3, things like that. While those things aren't sort of dominating headlines in the same way, it did sort of chuck me into this whole new world. I had been learning about that stuff, thinking I would try and go back into big tech. But actually, the more I learned about it and just sort of shared my learnings, again, actually, partly with the idea of trying to get a job, people would then ask me to do these talks. And so I would start off doing talks for free, then it was paid talks. And then I was kind of like, oh, this is sort of a business. And alongside that, it was also a community. So at that point, I'm called Women of Web3. And very much the same ambition, which is like the newest technologies are quite sort of masculine coded. The people that are talking about them are basically all men. All the kind of leading voices in these emerging technology spaces, all their CEOs, everyone getting funded is all guys. And so it becomes this like vicious cycle of it puts women off, therefore they're not getting involved in that obviously there's loads of factors when you're talking about women in tech, but it does tend to be more extreme with things like Web3 and AI. To go back to what you said about, so what did maternity leave mean? I was kind of panicking of thinking, I just started to do some speaking gigs, but I didn't feel pressure to be specifically working. I think the more I did on the community side of things, of kind of putting together events, which I sort of put them all on for free, I tried to get sponsorship, sometimes didn't. So I was like losing money, so doing things completely the wrong way around if I was trying to provide for my family. All these exciting opportunities, really. So I was basically only working because I felt excited about the subject matter. I didn't know how we were going to work out the money side of things, really. I suppose I treated a lot of it as an experiment. I think if I hadn't been so interested in the subject matter and so passionate about supporting women to learn more about it, I don't really know what I would have been doing in that time. I guess it'd probably been more just job interviews. And I think that would have been a lot more mentally taxing.
I think that's really incredible because obviously we've known each other for some time and I've seen you for years really being at the forefront of things like Web3, as you say, now moving into AI. And to hear that that's linked to your maternity leave experience is actually so inspiring to me, looking at how, yes, as part of it that is out of necessity, thinking about what is my career going to look like? How am I going to pivot? But the fact that your curiosity was really enhanced there, it just taps into so much of what we've been advocating for as part of the podcast and the emerging research. So thank you for sharing that. I find it really fortifying to hear.
Oh, amazing. And actually, it also reminds me that during that period of kind of newborn life, I was also then just doing a lot of stuff really late at night. So I was building a lot from my phone. So I have like, phone in one hand, baby strapped onto the other arm kind of thing of, like feeding or like contact naps while, while doing all this stuff online. But then also, I was speaking to like Randy Zuckerberg on Twitter Spaces at like 2 a.m, but, while doing like nappy changes and stuff like that, or being like, oh, sorry, the baby's crying, I can't talk right now. It was quite a weird time. And kudos to my partner for putting up with it all, because it was quite strange. I think also being in a sort of new unknown industry, in a sort of undefined role of what I was doing, maybe kind of helped with the kind of becoming a mum. Like basically everything was new. I was no longer working in a normal job in Facebook. I was no longer not a mum. I feel really glad things worked out the way they did, because if I had stayed at Facebook, if I had been offered a role there, I wouldn't have just like randomly been like, oh, I'm going to go start a speaking business and manage to get a TEDx talk, and sort of created so many opportunities for me because I had to, right? I was trying to sort of figure things out and work out, is this a viable path? Is this a different way to provide for the family?
So interesting to hear you say that. And we hear that a lot from our guests around the, I guess, the need to find something different that works and that's not the traditional. And that doesn't mean that you're not ambitious. Finding that alternative career that worked for you and your family. So that all happened in 2020. Now we're in 2026 with the kind of evolution of AI. What would you have done differently? How would you have used AI to help you through that journey?
Okay, so for me, it's twofold. I think it would have been a very different experience if AI, as we know and love or hate it today, if I'd had that in my kind of becoming a mum and job seeking experience, that would have been really different for me. That like I would have been asking a lot of questions to ChatGPT or whichever AI. I can't really remember where I was finding answers to stuff. I think it was kind of buried within forums or like Peanut app and things like that. Or, sometimes asking friends who also were uh, struggling to have time to reply on WhatsApp because they also have young babies. So ChatGPT did come out in 2022 when I'd already started doing what I was doing. However, I was always experimenting with it, but because there were so many people so many guys particularly, that were in the kind of blockchain, Web3, metaverse stuff, that did this like overnight pivot from like, I'm a Web3 expert to I'm an AI expert, that I really was actually trying not to do too much talking about AI because I didn't want to. I don't know. There was a lot of. It all felt quite shady, and it was all a bit of a wild west, to be honest. Especially because people were sort of claiming to be experts in this stuff. Though, though now I actually slightly wish I'd maybe made the pivot slightly sooner. But I suppose also the way I see it is that it feels like AI is here forever in the sort of version as we know it, but actually the words we use about it, the technology itself, all this stuff is going to change again, which is why I also kind of keep coming back to the idea of talking about women and emerging tech, because, if I'd called it like Gen AI girls, already that would be out of date. And AI girl gang will also become outdated really quickly. So I've talked about it being here for a good time, not for a long time. Um, and so I'm going to just try just having it in 2026. And I've talked about the fact that it's going to like spontaneously combust after that point. But if there's enough momentum, maybe I should sort of reconsider that. But I do feel like, by December 31st of this year, inevitably everything will be unrecognizable again.
So tell us all about AI Girl Gang. You've mentioned it a couple of times. Bianca and I are both subscribers and completely obsessed, but we'd love to hear how it came about.
Yeah, so I mean, the community already existed. So we're already doing in-person events. I was doing a podcast over the space of sort of 2-3 years. But to be honest, I was slightly losing my creative way with it. Like it had been Women of Web3, the next big thing. I think I'd lost a little bit of the energy and love for it just because I wasn't sure. Like the mission is the same. I just wasn't sure what the execution was. There was an absolute shitstorm, which is that I had a miscarriage, and that it was such a weird week or like phase of my life. It went more than a week, like a sort of 2 weeks or a month phase of my life. I didn't really know anything about miscarriage, and so for me, it was a real shock as to how it played out. I'd realised I knew nothing about it. I thought miscarriage was like a lightning strike of like, suddenly you've had a miscarriage. And so maybe it is like that for some women, but it's so taboo that I didn't know any of this stuff. So I'd gone for an early scan and found out that I had a missed miscarriage, which was, obviously really shit. And I've actually also felt like the sonographer didn't do a very good job of explaining it. I had actually heard of that, but I felt like she was really being unclear. So I was like, having to ask questions like, so is this not a viable pregnancy? Or just, I felt like she was being quite vague, maybe to like save my feelings. But I was like, this is life and death stuff. You need to tell me, is this a pregnancy or not? Yeah. I also didn't know how painful it would be. So I basically was like, I decided, I'm assuming I can sort of talk about all this because of the nature of this podcast. There's like nowhere else is a good forum to talk
Of
about it. But
course.
I think
This information is what women need to be talking about more, and like the realities of it. And it's so important. And like, we are so grateful for you sharing your story. So please feel like as much as you're comfortable to share, please do share, because I know that it will help other women listening to the podcast.
And I also appreciate it's probably quite triggering for a lot of women because miscarriage is so common and yet not really talked about.
So often you don't know the people in your life have had miscarriages until you have one yourself and you start sharing, and then they say, me too.
That's exactly what's happened. Having had the other like random details of this, I find it funny in retrospect, or like, it was even kind of funny at the time, is that when I was speaking to I guess they're nurses, actually, I think they're actually midwives, which I remember is actually quite an upsetting term, like speaking to somebody when you already know that you've had the miscarriage and you're like speaking to people who introduce themselves as midwives. And so they were saying, you know, they sort of talked me through my options for a miscarriage, which is, and so this is not the answer to what AI Girl Gang is, but it's kind of, for me, why everything came about, is you can do the sort of waiting it out to basically, it'll happen naturally, but it could be today, it could be in like a couple of weeks. And for me, that was too much uncertainty. It terrified me, the idea of kind of still having a pregnancy and having no, that really freaked me out. Another option is the sort of medical route of you take really strong hormones to kind of bring on a miscarriage. That's what I went for. And it was actually, incredibly painful. I had been warned that it's more painful than the sort of natural route. And the other option is surgery to remove the pregnancy. And for me, that also felt too scary, felt too serious for an early pregnancy. And so I went for the what I thought was the sort of happy medium option. And when we were talking about when to do it, they said they've got availability on like Thursday or Friday, and I was like, I was like, do you mind if I just check my work calendar? And I was like, this feels ridiculous. And I was like looking through when stuff was, and I was like, how long do you think I need to be not working for? And I was like, can it be as short as like a couple of days because things are quite busy? And they were kind of looking at each other like, okay. And I was looking through my calendar, and I was like, oh, do you know what? There's like things are just busy, so there's no convenient time for me to have a miscarriage. So can we just go for Thursday, please? Even at the time, it did feel like a bit funny or a bit ridiculous. And after taking this and going home and just being in just so much pain and being on codeine, I couldn't even look at my phone because I was just so like loopy with like pain and also medication. I was a bit just literally just like staring out the window, just like it was a very, very strange experience. I guess it's like being very ill. And but having that time to just be like, lying there staring out the window, you do end up having different thoughts than usual. And over the space of a few days, because I wasn't really using my phone, I was just having this kind of weird dead time. I had this kind of weird like creative renaissance of I felt suddenly really creative and sort of ideas that had been percolating in the back of my mind, but hadn't actually sort of properly all married up together. Of kind of like, I love lots of kind of, I've always been obsessed with retro, whether it's kind of like branding, anything like that. So I'm weirdly like retro obsessed. I also know that the name of what I do, because it being called Next Big Thing at that point, wasn't really giving women what they need. It wasn't sort of showing them this is something you should be part of. That if you call it something like AI Girl Gang, people know what it is and they know maybe they want to be part of that. And I also knew that I'd been playing with this term AI Girl for like a year or two because I'd wanted to sort of call myself that, as like I'd put like a TikTok, which never actually came to anything, called Lauren AI Girl. But AI girl basically means like AI generated girlfriend who, like will do anything for men. So, but kind of all these things, but I was thinking actually there's an opportunity to reclaim that and turn in an AI girl from a virtual submissive girlfriend into a woman that's curious about AI and what's coming next. So, and it was like a lightning strike of inspiration of thinking about all these things. And just these ideas that had just been in the back of my mind for ages just all kind of came together perfectly as like, I need to call it AI Girl Gang. It needs to be early 2000s branded. So it's all like Tamagotchis and application windows, and just have fun with it, because that's when we were really excited about the internet, was like the early noughties when I was a teenager, and anything was possible, playing The Sims, going on chat rooms. We weren't really worried about breaking things. It was like this quite exciting period of the internet. And I was like, I think women need to feel the same about AI today, like make it a bit less sinister or pressurized and an opportunity to kind of be playful and curious. It was this weird phase of my life that even just since that point, I feel somehow more myself. I mean, I've been like on a hormonal roller coaster, but I kind of made peace with the fact that the pregnancy wasn't meant to be at that point, and that kind of feels like this is big switch up since then. And maybe we will still go on to have a second kid. Who knows? But I suppose I don't feel regretful about it. Not that I was ever in control of it or not. There's something significant about it. The fact that these two big things in my life are bookended by finding out I was pregnant and finding out I was not pregnant. And I think there's a weird neatness to that.
I'm really grateful for you sharing, and I know that a lot of people listening will be able to relate to that. I guess a sense of abandonment as well. We've spoken about this before on the podcast about how sometimes the system itself just leaves you feeling really vulnerable and unsupported. So I'm so sorry that you went through that. But I understand what you're saying about having that space. Like, when are we ever off of our phones for
Hmm.
long periods of our
Hmm.
time? And you are able to kind of tap into that creativity.
Hmm.
I think something wonderful has come out of you being able to take that time and space. And I'm happy for you that you found something that's given you a little bit of purpose and kind of, as you said, reinvigorated you. So that's amazing to hear.
One last thing on the miscarriage piece, which was that it was very naive to think it would be over and done with in 2 days. That was a learning for next time. Is that I was kind of out of action for nearly sort of 2 weeks. And it's hardcore. And again, this stuff will vary from person to person, woman to woman. But pregnancy and work life are not always going to be compatible in ways that we can never really predict.
It's not lost on me, Lauren, that you had these incredible ideas at times when you were a bit disconnected from the day-to-day world and society. So it's almost as if you took a step back, your vantage point changed, and it gave you the clarity for what was to come. And so I just find that fascinating. As you say, these bookends, and I'm really grateful to you for sharing that. And I know, Rose, it marries up with the research that you've been doing and some of the science that we've been learning about neurologically too.
The second time around when you go through matrescence, it's more operational rather than identity shift. So it makes sense that something like that would occur off the back of beginning to go through it again.
I'm thinking about the kind of how do you operationalize a family when it changes in size. Something that really surprised me in the aftermath of all of this is that I thought I'd feel more sad, and I did feel sad, but I also found this sense of slight relief, which initially I was thinking like, well, I shouldn't feel relieved, but I realised that because we've got such a happy setup at home at the moment, like what feels like a good balance. I mean, obviously it's mad because like having a 4-year-old kid, it's not that relaxing, but we feel like we've got a good thing going on. And we talk about how much we kind of love things and don't want to change anything, and it's like, well, actually, an additional family member would probably change everything. And it scared me, the idea of being heavily pregnant and really uncomfortable or in pain, and the idea that when you're pregnant you can't just kind of temporarily switch it off. You can't have a 2-minute break from being pregnant, which is quite annoying. So I was kind of scared of the journey of pregnancy, scared of going back to newborn life and not knowing. I have to remember how to do all of that stuff, scared of being incredibly sleep deprived and whether I'd be a mean partner when I'm sleep deprived and hormonal, and scared of what does that mean for your older kid, changing the size of the family. There was this like tiny voice in me that was like feeling a tiny bit relieved. For me, it felt like if you kind of book to go on a bungee jump and you get to the top and they're like, oh, actually it's not the right weather for it, so we can't do it today, you have to go home, and you'd be like, oh no. That that was the thing you'd been gearing yourself up for and you had mentally committed to it, but then actually you don't have to go through with it, and it's a really scary thing. We would still like to have a second kid, but maybe right then wasn't the right moment for it. And now I've actually kind of done some of the mental work that maybe I needed to, of like thinking about what does all this stuff mean, and am I mentally prepared for that stuff? I guess it's also just that a lot of this stuff is hard, right? That like it's hard being a working parent. It's hard learning to breastfeed. I've heard from other women that breastfeeding a second or third can be such a different experience, that is not a given. That if I found it really hard the first time round, but yeah, it sounds like it varies wildly.
Every baby is unique, aren't they? There's no blueprint for babies. I just wanted to ask you a little bit more about the AI Girl Gang. And I feel like the timing of you doing this is at a moment in time where it's going to be so important for women to really, to not get left behind. Did that form part of the reason, your purpose?
So you're absolutely right about the feeling of worrying about women being left behind, because at the moment we're seeing women are using AI less than men by about 25%. And that does worry me, because you've got this growing AI literacy gap, and that will actually probably continue to grow as a gap, because we've got more women who are feeling quite anti-AI at the moment. And there are good reasons. Women have got more sort of ethical, environmental concerns about it. Women are more at risk in terms of their jobs when it comes to AI. And also a lot of, as I've said, a lot of this stuff is very bro-coded. So there are more women saying, I don't want that. Like, not just they haven't upskilled yet, they just don't want it, which is allowed. But it does worry me that everyone else is getting this benefit that they won't get to enjoy, I suppose.
We're in a time where we have a very clear gender pay gap, a very clear gender investment gap, a very clear gender pension gap. And I think we are on the cusp of having a gender AI skills gap as well. And I think you're absolutely right there. And a question I ask in my research is about what AI tools could exist that would actually help you. And a lot of women that I speak to are like, oh, I'm not sure if I would want AI to help me run my household or take away some of the cognitive load. Like you said, it's obviously a personal choice and women are more conscious, but how would you encourage women?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one. So I did a TEDx talk a couple of years ago, but it was 2023. And in it, I mentioned the need for, I was saying that with AI changing everything so rapidly, there is a real risk of women being left behind. And that's something I sort of spoke about on stage in 2023 kind of time, and saying this is going to get faster and faster and more extreme, especially because you've got sort of biased data being put in of say a doctor is typically a man, or what, like all these base things we're trying to get away from, those stereotypes. But if you've got a massive data set that says most doctors are men, then that's what the AI decides is the case. I had all these concerns like 3 years ago, and it feels like none of that stuff has been fixed in the interim. But when thinking about how to sort of position it differently, in the last sort of 2-3 years of my work, I've been trying to sort of say, hey, you should be interested in this thing because you don't want to get left behind. But now that there's so much of this narrative online, including I saw a sort of meme of like these, I think it was like cartoon characters of dancing, like prancing around the garden and being like, I'm one of the women that's left behind by AI. People are, actively saying, I don't want this. And so I think by me doubling down on that position of you should learn this, otherwise you risk being left behind, maybe isn't helping. I need to work out what that new narrative is. And I think for me, some of that does come back to that playfulness I talked about, that can you make AI and also kind of the internet feel a little bit more welcoming. You can also have a bit of being silly, because all of it can feel so serious, so life and death. There's so many of the media headlines are always so quite sort of violent, actually, in the language of like be talking about like a jobs bloodbath, or everything's in real extremes. So offering an alternative where things feel, that you can just kind of lean into your curiosity rather than be a sort of AI or die. Um, I think that's kind of what's needed at the moment.
I think that's so interesting that you say that. So it's now clear, I think, and there's lots of research now around it, that AI is not going to replace everything and everyone. I see it as almost like those Duplo. Are they called Duplo blocks? The ones that you stack up. Like one role might have 5, and you might have 10 of those roles at the moment. And actually, AI can take away 2 of those blocks, but you still need those really human capabilities
Mhm.
in order to execute. And then there's additional capabilities that we're going to need to focus on, like judgment and like critical thinking and giving feedback. And I think we've now come round a bit more where people realize that they're not, or hopefully people realize now that AI is not going to replace everybody and everything, but to be engaged with it and using it and like be the kind of human in the lead, I guess, is going to be a really critical piece. So I think that's really interesting you mentioned that, because creating that fear and people thinking they're going to lose their jobs, people are like, well, I'm just not going to engage with it because
Mhm.
it's going to take my job. So now I'm hoping that with this kind of new narrative, this, it's not going to take your job. Actually, please use it. I was actually telling Bianca before we clicked record how I've been setting up my second brain in Claude, and
Mhm.
how I've synced it with my calendar, so it understands me well enough to know that I can be a bit of a lastminute.com person. So if it's something's in my calendar and it says, Rose, you have an interview with Lauren on this date, you need to send her a prep email. You need to get some questions ready. I think that's so helpful to be able to use it in ways that work for you as an individual. A lot of people use it as well as almost like a search engine, and actually
Mhm.
that's not going to reduce your cognitive load. What could reduce your cognitive load is just like not having to think about these extra steps. So yeah, I think it's such an interesting time we're in. I'm hoping that that kind of reframing narrative around work and workforce will help as well.
Totally. For me, it actually feels quite an exciting moment that we are going to be able to automate, including some of that home life stuff. I don't think we're quite there yet in terms of a technology being able to take on the mental load of running a household, but we're making baby steps. And I think another thing to remember is that we are in this like sort of awkward teenager phase of AI. Is that we're trying to kind of randomly strap together, your calendar and your AI and your maybe your meeting recorder and your something, and so telling them to talk to each other, and then being like, no, not that, and doing a lot of copying and pasting, right? And then chucking something from Claude into ChatGPT and be like, what do you think of that output? And is we are in this quite clunky phase, and so I suppose I'm quite looking forward to the fact that yes, we're the ones experimenting quite early, and it can feel like we're late, but actually we are still early in this stuff compared to a lot of people, and there'll be benefits to having learned about that, but also it's going to keep getting better and easier, and like these technologies will speak to each other more easily. There'll be less of the copying and pasting, or it spitting out wrong answers. Hopefully fewer hallucinations. We're in a kind of a funny moment. We're in a messy middle when it comes to the technology itself, how it's being rolled out, AI adoption, and then what that means for our real lives. Because the other point is that the more we automate, it's kind of what you're saying, we're just allowing ourselves to fill our time with even more stuff, rather than it actually, automating something away, and then you can take that time back to, follow your dreams, whatever it is. It feels like maybe a little bit of a trap that we're telling ourselves we're being more productive, but we're just stacking more into our days.
Yeah, we're just approaching burnout much faster by
Probably,
doing
yeah.
much more.
Yeah, in more creative ways. There's so much there, Lauren, that's really interesting. This point about shifting the narrative, I find particularly something that's on my mind because I saw an Instagram post from Sophia Amoruso. She was the CEO of Nasty Gal, now an investor, and she got all this hate. I don't know if you saw it about some of the AI technologies that she's investing in and using. That resistance I really find fascinating. When we think about our audience here, there's a lot of new mums, pregnant women. We know that their threat responses are, of course, heightened. So part of it could be that this is a threat to, as we say, their jobs, their livelihoods, their way of connecting with the world. For someone in that mindset, what baby step would you tell them to take beyond subscribing for AI Girl Gang, of course? Where should they begin? What would you have them know about not to feel intimidated, but rather this being an enablement piece? What kind of one practical thing would you have them do?
I think you can start small by just kind of following other people who are sharing their learnings. So there's a few influencers I probably suggest following, like Cat GPT on Instagram or TikTok.
She's brilliant.
Cat GPT, yeah, she's great. She's probably got like 500,000 followers or something, but she's great at breaking down complex subjects. And I think if you're brand new to AI, maybe some of her stuff might feel slightly more complex. And actually, maybe the same for this other guy I'll recommend, Ruben Hassid. I'm not sure how to say his name, but How to AI, which is his Substack. He's also got an enormous, his LinkedIn following is insane. But both of them are quite good at kind of, breaking down these subjects, making it feel, well, slightly less daunting. Even a small thing like that, by sort of going and actively following a few different people deliberately, as of newsletters or accounts, can be that baby step as to kind of, I'm just going to sort of learn by some of the stuff by osmosis. Same with listening to some podcasts. There's somebody called Heather Murray. She runs AI for non-techies. She also shares interesting stuff on her LinkedIn. I know that sounds like a underwhelming answer, and this might also, but actually asking AI, so asking ChatGPT or asking Claude, how should I get started? And maybe spending a little bit of time describing where you're up to, of like, I don't know, I've been made to use Copilot at work, but then, just sort of describing your level of like, I've tried it for rewriting a press release, I've tried it for this, but what else do I need to do? And hopefully it would sort of guide you towards a better prompting technique where you can sort of describe more about what kind of output you want, not just using it as a sort of glorified Google, and using it as more of a thought partner that can now also go and take action, depending which AI you've got and how much money you're spending on it. It can actually go and action things for you. This feels like a sort of exciting step change. Also, I would probably say that if you are seeing people saying that they've automated everything and they've got like 50 agents running their whole business for millions, well, A, there's not that many women saying that, but B, I think there's a lot of hot air out there. People are way earlier on their AI learning journey than the internet would suggest. Maybe that's also just because I'm a bit of a AI echo chamber. When I speak to real humans about their AI use, I speak to lots of businesses because I do a lot of AI training. People are way further down the sort of newbie end, or just kind of experimenting with stuff. So if you're any further than that, you are already winning.
I think that test and learn piece is so critical, even like testing different models to understand which one you work, because people have different preferences, don't they? It's not like ChatGPT is better than Claude or Claude is better than Perplexity. It really depends on what you want to use it for and how well you can interact with it.
So obviously, I'm recording this with a baby resting on my chest. And we know that there has been this resistance, as we've spoken about, to some of these tools, to this technology, because it feels intimidating. It's moving really quickly. And until you, Lauren, many of us didn't actually see ourselves in it or in the conversation at all. So I, having thought about it quite a lot, being on maternity leave, and for the first time in my working life, not being in the day to day work mode, I really think that as mothers, we're actually very well positioned to have a completely different perspective on these tools. And I think my rallying cry that I want to make at this point in our conversation is that actually, if you are a mum, a new mum, a mother of many children, whatever your situation, your perspective is vital for how this technology evolves. You mentioned earlier that if we are not in these conversations, if we're not influencing these tools, you referenced the doctor example, we have to almost, I think there is, I don't want to say responsibility, but there is something very powerful in us getting involved however we can at this stage, not opting out, but actually opting completely in and bringing the creativity that we've spoken about in this conversation that comes through this experience of matrescence, the clarity that we have, And I'm just excited for more mothers to get involved and to find their place with it, because I know that it can exist. We just have to be brave enough to say, I'm not going to know everything about AI, but I can carve out this space for me. Maybe it is, as you say, Lauren, going from treating it as a search engine to I'm going to try and integrate one workflow, or I'm going to build a project in Claude and see what that can do for me. But don't be afraid. Don't feel like you're behind. Don't feel that you're missing out. There's so much in this that we can do and we can carve out for ourselves if we're curious enough to get there.
I love that. I feel like you've actually just nailed it. You've said all the things that I really feel so strongly, and I think you're absolutely right that we need women's voices, we need mums' voices in talking about and building and sort of participating in this enormous shift in how we work. So the idea that if women opt out, then they don't get to influence that conversation or don't get to influence the technology. If we sort of opt out of that and say I don't want AI at all, then we've got even less say over almost like AI is something that happens to us rather than with us. And yes, I find it a worry, but also as you say, it's an enormous opportunity for women, for mums to um, have a bit more agency in what's coming next, because it is this enormous shift. And I do also see it as an amazing opportunity for the individual, that I do feel more productive. I do feel like I'm thinking through problems differently, because the more you use AI in the way we know it today, in terms of like asking stuff to a very clever chatbot, um, because of the questions it then asks you back to understand what you mean, I think I've become better at. I've actually gained some of that mental clarity as kind of like, what am I actually trying to execute here, or what am I trying to get to the nub of here? And so it's helped me think differently. It's helped me sort of structure my work differently, and think through some of the kind of meaty problems, because it's a bit like having a mentor on tap that you're going to have to start with, like, sorry, only if you have time, or like, if not, like, no worries if not. Don't need to say any of that to an AI. It's like always available to you on tap. I feel thrilled at the idea that more women are taking this stuff up and using it to their advantage.
I feel like it's rather than reframing it from like don't be left behind, rather than like engage and like lead from the front with it. Is there anything that we've not spoken about today that you think is important for our listeners?
Maybe just to reiterate the fact that you should try out baby steps with learning AI, or if you already know some, challenge yourself to sort of take things a little bit further, improve your prompting technique. Maybe, if you're already more confident with it, see if you can then build an agent or sort of automation of some kind. And I suppose it's also about kind of enjoy it, right? That this is also, as well as the fact that it's as clunky as it's ever going to be, this is also probably the cheapest that AI is going to be, because they want us in. So there's amazing technology that we didn't have 5 years ago is like right at our fingertips, literally, for very little money, or even you can even use stuff for free. So sort of getting started and use it to your advantage would be something that I hope that I can hit home with.
Thank you. And thank you so much for spending this hour with us. To close the episode, we like to retire a term. What term would you like to retire today?
I would like to retire missed miscarriage, because missed really annoyed me. It made me feel like I wasn't paying attention, that I didn't realize I was no longer pregnant because there were no signs. And it really felt like the sort of onus was on me for failing to notice something so significant, when there is such a lack of empathy in many of these terms, and for me that's my one that needs to get in the bin.
I'm so with you and how the language puts all the onus on the woman. Your failings, this pregnancy hasn't progressed, unsuccessful. There's just so much there. So miscarriage, totally with you. Thank you. And thank you for sharing the story of it too. It's going to help a lot of people who quietly have gone through this and haven't heard it represented or shared the way that you did. So thank you.
Thank you all for joining us today.
If you've taken something from this episode, we'd be so grateful if you shared it with a friend.
We'd also love to hear from you. Find us on Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn. And please share your questions, comments, and experiences. This is a conversation we want to build together.
Until next time.